oh my God, my body has been sending me all these signals. My anxiety has simply just been a mechanism to tell me to slow the fuck down. But that slowing down was not easy. It did not feel good at the start, even though it led to me feeling less anxious or less depressed. It didn't feel generally safe to slow down. Hey, I'm Hannah, your host of Too Much, Not Enough. After a life-threatening burnout in 2021, I released the brittle version of success that was slowly killing me and built a life that feels as good as it looks. This podcast is for ambitious, soul-led humans ready to stop shrinking and start living big, bold, fully aligned lives. So if you've ever felt like too much and not enough, join me and my guests as we take an unfiltered deep dive into why being the real you was never the problem, and how to create a life your nervous system actually likes. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Too Much, Not Enough. I'm Hannah, your host, and it's just you and me today, cutie. So let's get into rest. We talk a lot about rest in my line of work, somatic coaching, wellness. Rest is extremely important to your health, to the health of your nervous system, to your entire body. But what happens when rest itself feels hard? If slowing down perhaps brings up guilt, anxiety, or the fear of falling behind, you are not alone. I have experienced all those feelings and more when it comes to resting. So we're going to explore today why rest can feel unsafe to our nervous system and how we can gently rewire our relationship with stillness so that it nourishes us rather than threatens us. And more than anything, you may have heard this before, but I'm going to say it and I want you to really hear it. You do not have to earn rest. It is your God-given right as a human being. And resting is not a pause from life. It is an integral part of life and an integral part of your healing. So I think we all grew up with a story about rest, about stillness, about being unproductive. My story comes from a family of A-type, high-achieving neurodivergents. Now, if you haven't heard my episode about unmasking and late diagnosed ADHD that I did with my sister, my dad, myself, and my sister were all diagnosed with ADHD, me and my sister in our 30s and my dad in his 60s. So we did not know growing up that we had this neurodivergent ADHD, hyperactivity, go kind of vibe in the family. We just thought that was who we were, which I guess is who we are. But anyways, I grew up in a family where my dad was always going and doing stuff and being productive. He was a workaholic. And when he wasn't working, he was doing things around the house all the time. And there was a certain standard and really unwritten understanding about producing and doing. And that was unconsciously communicated to my nervous system that it was safe. That the more I did, the more I produced, the more worthy I was. This narrative continued into school, where I got really good grades and therefore put a lot of effort into my schoolwork and doing and learning, and then translated once I left school into work where the approval of grades no longer existed, and therefore I had to figure out another way to feel my worthiness. And that meant the more productive I was, the more I climbed the ladder, the more I got paid, the more safe I felt, essentially. And I, again, for those of you who don't know, was an event producer for 15 years of my life, which is a very fast-paced, stressful, and demanding industry where it is constant go and very little rest. And there was a certain pride that I felt in going and doing and crushing 80-hour weeks, and also definitely a sense of like attachment and almost addiction to that stress, for sure. And so 5 years ago, when my body fought back against everything that I had been putting it through and forced me to slow down because I was sick, mentally, emotionally, and physically sick, in such an extreme state of burnout that I had to slow down and figure out what was going on. I had to take a step back, and thus became my long road to understanding that rest was something I had to get comfortable with. And I would say the first catalyst of this for me was learning that I was a projector in human design. So for those of you who don't know much about human design, would highly recommend going back and listening to the episode with Tiffany Jacobs, where we dive into human design. But essentially, there are 4 or 5 main types. We've got our generators, our manifestors, our manifesting generators, our projectors, and our reflectors. Generators have like a self-sourced energy. Projectors do not. And projectors need a lot of rest. They are here to guide and lead and to not do all of the doing all of the time. We need to retreat a lot. We need to kind of re-up our energy and then come back and do our thing. And that was something that I had absolutely no understanding about. I was go, 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 nonstop, always pushing. It was hard. It was exhausting, but just pushing through, doing it, being on site at events and working, from 5 a.m. until midnight, on my feet the whole day, not eating, not sleeping enough, and in a constant state of stress and deep attachment to that stress. And when I first learned about being a projector, I got a little blueprint that taught me about what being a projector was. I couldn't read it. There was such a lack of safety in my body when it came to rest that I could not even read about the fact that it was saying that I, as a human, was designed to embrace rest. Like full rejection of it, which should have been my first sign. So I took a little bit of time away from that and I dove more into, the somatic side of things and just sort of intentionally starting to get to know my body's signals and what it needed and when it needed it. And as I was doing that, I realized the more I listened to my body's request for rest, and the more I actually did that, like when I felt like, oh my God, I can't possibly do this thing or push through another hour of work. I need to just stop. And once I started actually listening to that cue and doing it, I found that I was just generally more at peace. The anxiety that I thought was just like a part of my everyday life started to dissipate. And I thought, maybe there's something to this whole rest thing. And so the more I listened to that part, and don't get me wrong, at the start, it was very baby steps. I'm talking like in the middle of the workday, maybe I would stop and lay on the couch for an hour and read or watch TV. Or maybe in the evenings when I felt like I really just wanted to keep going, I would force myself to stop and take a break or go and hang out with friends, make myself dinner, whatever it was. And I found that the anxiety wasn't as persistent. And then I realized, oh my God, my body has been sending me all these signals through probably easier and quieter signals at the start, but then louder and louder. My anxiety has simply just been a mechanism to tell me to slow the fuck down, essentially. But that slowing down was not easy. It did not feel good at the start, even though it led to me feeling less anxious or less depressed. It didn't feel generally safe to slow down because, as I mentioned, since I was a little kid, my examples have been about doing more, always doing more, doing the most, achieving the best you possibly can, getting paid more and therefore doing more, then getting accolades for doing more and therefore thinking, oh, doing more keeps me worthy, safe, and connected. And so then I should just do more on top of that more. So as I started to understand this correlation between rest and feeling more content and grounded in my system, I realized I'm gonna have to figure out how to feel safer in resting because my body needs this. It is overall going to be so much more beneficial for me. So I dove into understanding the nervous system better. And the fun thing about our nervous systems are they keep us safe through enacting fight, flight for survival, rest and digest for times where we need to sort of recoup and replenish our resources. But here's the thing. In our modern society, our nervous systems can become attuned to things that we perceive as a threat that are not, in fact, a threat. For example, not being productive. Not being productive feels very threatening to a system that has always believed that in order to be liked, accepted, and worthy, you have to keep doing more. And therefore, your nervous system feels, quote unquote, good and safe when you're doing more, which means that when you think about or engage in rest, the nervous system goes, wait a second, this doesn't feel safe. And therefore it feels uncomfortable. Because if you are attuned to chaos producing and doing more, that doing less or doing nothing at all is going to feel unsafe, even though it is in your best interest in the long run. So there's a little bit of this adjustment period that needs to happen, as I learned, where I leaned into small chunks of stillness and rest, allowing my nervous system to understand that this is in fact safe, that we are not all of a sudden going to be fired or cut off from society if we slow down and rest. Because here's the thing, we live in a capitalist society. And in order for capitalism to continue working, it needs labor to keep feeding that capitalistic machine. And it needs people to earn money to keep feeding again into that capitalistic machine. And how do we earn money? How do we build things? How do we keep producing things to then be bought by others? We keep doing and we keep producing more. We keep going to work, we keep putting in more hours, we keep expanding and one-upping. And the thing with our capitalist system is it is forever exponential. So we need to keep doing more and producing more to keep the capitalist system going. And therefore, the greatest threat to that is resting, is slowing down, is doing nothing. But I will tell you, it feels so freaking good. So when those emotions and fears come up with slowing down or stopping what you're doing, those fears of perhaps getting left behind because you're slowing down and not saying yes to that next thing, even though you've already got too much on your plate, that fear that comes up with perhaps becoming a parent and needing to shift your priorities away from solely focusing on work to actually focusing on building your family, or perhaps when you realize that the career that you've been working towards for the past decade is actually no longer, in fact, serving you or even what you want, and therefore you're going to slow down to find the new path, there can be a lot of fear and discomfort that comes up. In addition to that, what might simply come up is your feeling that when you slow down, you might have to address other things in your life that you have been ignoring by focusing on producing, doing, working, going over here. And I think there was no better example of that than the pandemic, when the world shut down and we had to retreat to our homes with not much of an outlet outside of that. And we really had to sit with ourselves and the states of our lives because there was nothing to distract us, or less, I should say, not nothing, a lot less to distract us. And that slowing down, I think for a lot of people, was maybe their first taste of how fucking sweet rest can be. But for a lot of us, it also became one of the first times in a very long time, if ever, that we had to sit with the reality of who we are and how we feel and how we exist in this life. And for me, that has actually been one of my greatest deterrents from resting. Yes, the fear of being seen as not productive and not worthy and not accepted and belonging, for sure, that is a great fear. But my other greatest fear used to be slowing down and having to sit with my emotions. And I realized this when I would come up on a weekend. Great example, anyone who's experienced summer in Toronto or summer anywhere where you have a long, hard winter. Winter is such a hibernation period. We slow down so much, as we should. And there's a lot less to do, a lot less to engage in. And you find yourself having very lazy weekends and watching a lot of movies and not really going outside much. And then the summer comes and it ramps up massively. And all of a sudden you're booked every weekend and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to keep up with this? And then all of a sudden an empty weekend pops up on your calendar and you're like, whoa, this is very exciting. I have a free weekend. I can do whatever I want And then that sneaky little gremlin comes in and goes, yeah, but do you really want to just kind of like sit and do nothing this weekend? Isn't that going to feel a little uncomfortable? Isn't that going to mean that you're going to kind of have to face like feelings of being bored or feelings that you have been avoiding feeling coming up because you now finally have the space to experience those feelings? Maybe we don't want to do that. And so as I untangled this like fear of sitting with myself, facing myself essentially, I realized that if I ever wanted to be able to properly embrace rest, I was going to have to learn how to get comfortable with being with myself without the distractions. Because that's the thing. There are different kinds of rest, but true rest is not scrolling on your phone. True rest is not watching 50 movies back to back or binging a whole season of a show like I did yesterday. It is really, truly disconnecting, laying down and being present and mindful. And don't get me wrong, resting and watching TV, resting and reading, resting and scrolling your phone, still versions of rest. I'm not saying don't do those things, but real rest is fully untangling, is really being maybe out in nature and present with the sounds and the smells and the sights, of disconnecting from the external absolute influx of information that we are taking in every day, of not taking your laptop on vacation so that you aren't thinking about work at all. Or at minimum, if you are thinking about work, you are not able to then engage in that work. It is about true disconnection. And when we truly disconnect and find that stillness, there's going to be a period where a bunch of uncomfortable shit comes up that we'll have to move through, because it's going to feel like you want to abandon resting. It's going to feel like rest is unsafe when you start moving through those initial stages of discomfort. And then when you move through those and get more comfortable with those, you will then be able to embrace the sweetness of rest. And I will say that this is an ever evolving practice for myself, because of course I go through busy periods in my life, busy seasons, and then I kind of have to relearn how to embrace and lean into rest. But I guess all of that's to say, like, if you are realizing that you want more stillness, pause, and rest in your life, but then those sneaky, scary emotions are coming up when you think about stopping or slowing down, there's nothing wrong with you. In fact, your nervous system is working the way it's supposed to. We just need to get in and do some reattunement there to make rest feel like the delicious gift that it is for our systems. And so for me, there were a couple of things that I needed to do in order to feel safe in my system when I slowed down, when I found those moments of stillness. A lot of that was redefining my self-worth, because my self-worth was so connected to productivity. And it still partly is. I still wrestle with it, but more often than not, my new version, my new definition of self-worth wins out, rather than what used to happen is the fact that I had to be doing and producing in order to feel worthy at all. And so it took years, quite frankly, to untangle from that outsourced version of self-worth, the one that began in school when I was getting good grades and getting good comments from teachers, and then kept evolving when I started my career and started working full time and was making money and, like I said, climbing the ranks and getting good feedback from bosses and colleagues. Almost my entire self-worth was outsourced. It was externally validated. And so the biggest thing I had to do was figure out how to internally validate my self-worth and realize that I am not worthy by how much I do or produce. I am worthy by simply being a human, by simply being here. And if you're anything like me, you probably hear that and think, I don't understand. And that is because our brains are so deeply ingrained in our systems, in our societal systems that provide us with external validation, not just at work, but on social media. Every time we get a like, every time we get a text from a friend, there is an element of that external validation. Someone wants to talk to me. Someone likes what I have to say. Someone is interested in what I'm doing. And so untangling from that takes time. But once I was able to redefine that I was then able to embrace rest more because I was like, well, I don't have to be doing and producing for someone else in order to feel good in myself. And I will say that has gone in cycles, and each time I've kind of accessed a new layer. And I will say the deepening of that recently has been so intense. Shutting down my event production business at the end of last year, where I got a shit ton of external validation. It was basically my entire source of validation for the past 5 years. When I shut that down and started Soma Soma, my somatic coaching business, essentially it was crickets. I wasn't getting any clients, money wasn't coming in, and all of a sudden, this entire new layer of needing to redefine my self-worth came in, because all my nervous system wanted, the minute that I didn't have clients to busy myself with, money coming into my bank account, I felt so unsafe, and I just wanted to do and produce more. And I started going down the wrong path, for sure, because I was being driven by that fear of that lack of self-worth. And so I've sat in that a lot. I have in some cases forced rest when my entire mind and body was saying, no, you got to do more. You got to be on your computer. You're launching a new business. You need to be working 80 hours a week, hustle. You need to be doing shit all the time. You cannot slow down. You cannot take a day off. What are you thinking? And luckily with the foundation I built, I was able to come back to my regulation practices, to my nervous system capacity building practices, and remind myself that while I love my new business and I absolutely want to build it into something big and beautiful and great, that does not make me a more worthy or better person. Having more clients knocking at my door, having more money come into my bank account, does not change at my core who I am. It allows me to serve more people. It allows me to share my gifts with more people, which is something that I deeply enjoy. But it does not at its core make me a better person because of the dollar amount in my bank account or because of the number of clients on my calendar. And so it has been sort of a constant coming back and a constant readjusting to that feeling of safety and knowing that I am still safe and worthy and loved and accepted, even when I'm lying on my couch and not out there pushing out more social media posts or getting more clients booked into my calendar. And so some of the tiny shifts that I made when I began practicing rest as a ritual of self-trust and not as a reward to working so hard, because don't get me wrong, I would work really hard and then my body would crash out, and then I would view rest as a reward and think like, well, I did just come off a massive event where I've been going for the last few months, and I now deserve to rest, so I will rest. So it wasn't that I didn't rest before, I just only did it when my body was screaming at me to slow down. And instead, now it is a ritual actually in my life, which is so beautiful. It's this idea that like I started instituting Fridays as my day off. And that meant that if I did have a particularly busy week, or if I was at a point in my cycle where I was feeling like I had more energy, maybe I work on that day. But if I don't want to, that's okay. And that's my day to do whatever I want, whether it's to go sauna and cold plunge, whether it's to go to the park and read a book, or whether it's to cozy up on the couch, watch TV, whatever it is, those are my days. And that is a ritual of rest that I look forward to every week. I also bring it into my days, meaning that I listen to the signals in my body. And if my body is saying, I cannot get to the computer right now, I trust that signal. It has become a ritual that I trust the signals my body's giving me, even if my mind is like, yeah, but like it's Monday. It was just a weekend. You had 2 days off. So there's no way that you can have a slow, lazy morning this morning. Instead, I now have created a ritual out of trusting my signals in my body and just saying, okay, I hear you. I'm going to have a slow morning. And I will say 8 times out of 10, maybe 9 times out of 10, when I do that, I then get to my computer later in the day and I get just as much done as I would have if I had forced myself to start in the morning when my body was saying, no, not yet. I've become more comfortable with having much more space on my calendar, but that started small. because I work for myself. And one of the reasons that I started working for myself is because I wanted more freedom and spaciousness. And so I was strangely packing my days with stuff, taking meetings from 8:30 in the morning until 5:30 at night. And I was like, wait, this makes no sense. I really like to have slow, indulgent mornings. My body likes that. It really enjoys it. So why am I starting at 9 a.m.? I have no boss that requires me to start at 9 a.m. So it felt really scary, especially when I was new to my business back in, 2018. And I was like, oh gosh, is it gonna be weird to tell a client like I am only available between the hours of 10 and 6 or 10 and 5 or whatever it was? And I started doing it, and guess what? No one fucking cared. Yeah, of course, the odd time that a client wanted to meet earlier than 10, I would make it work. But my general rule when people reached out and was like, when are you available? I was like, oh, I'm available between 10 and 4 for meetings. And those were just the little incremental things I started doing to be like, okay, more space, more rest, more stillness, less rushing. Now, my meeting hours are between 11 and 3, and I don't book meetings outside of that. I do work outside of that, but I don't book meetings outside of that. I think what I'm trying to impress here is the importance of starting small, of like not trying to all of a sudden rush into it and take a full week off when you haven't taken a vacation in 6 years and think that you're going to be able to just like get on that vacation and feel amazing about resting. No, unfortunately, you're probably going to face with a really uncomfortable feeling and desperately wanting to check your emails or do work. And so do yourself a favor, and instead of trying to go all in at once, which is very much my personality, it's an all or nothing thing, but instead of trying to go all in at once, start with tiny shifts to make practicing rest a ritual. Because also I find when you start thinking about something as a ritual, it becomes a much more like luxurious thing that you want to engage with. So maybe that means that when you wake up in the morning, instead of jumping out of bed or instead of going on your phone, you pick up a book and you read for 10 minutes before getting out of bed. You can spare 10 minutes in your day. I know you can. In fact, just replace 10 minutes of scrolling with 10 minutes of reading. Or perhaps it's taking a bath and having nothing on during that bath. No phone, no TV. You're just laying, candle lights, and hanging out, chilling. Bringing in these little micro practices, micro moments of rest and pleasure in your life will then create that safety and attunement, which you can then take on to create bigger rest. And perhaps one day, for all of you entrepreneurs out there, you will go on that vacation and you will not even take your laptop. Your laptop will stay at home. You'll go on that vacation and you will truly disconnect. Maybe you will delete social media while you're on that vacation, and you'll actually have deep, rejuvenating rest, which you deserve. You do not need to earn, but that you at your core deserve. So if the thought of rest makes you want to jump out of your skin, you are not alone. Your nervous system is working to try and keep you safe, and that makes total sense. But rest is vitally important to creating and building a life that you not only enjoy, but that your body can hold. Because if your body can't hold the life that you are building, the business that you are building, the relationship that you are building, then the long-term success of that is very unlikely. So I'm going to leave you with a question. What are you going to do this week to bring in a micro practice of rest into your daily routine? And with that, I'll see you in the next episode.